02.21. I'm gonna call this work session open.
Okay. Thank you, commissioners. So this afternoon we'll talk about overview of business practices, processes, and norms at Lake County government, kind of how the board operates. One thing I did want to point out to you guys, just share, so where we're posting all this information on our website, so if you go to government or however you get to Board of County Commissioners, we have the onboarding tab right here. So you'll see our presentations for the next couple weeks will be put here, and then each department's onboarding memo will go under their say human services, will go under over here, just kind of 2025 onboarding memo. So they'll be in multiple places on the website for you, or for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
With that, now we'll kick off with how the board conducts business. Okay. All right. So for public meetings, and you'll notice there's something called Robert's Rules of Order. Bob was a guy who liked order and liked to get things done in
Orderly fashion.
in an orderly fashion, in a structured way. So the reason that boards use Robert's Rule of Order, it's kind of a standard ethics that help with orderly meetings. It helps clarify when majority rules, but then also allowing minority voices to be heard. It allows staff, guests, commissioners kind of to be recognized by the chair, which is one thing we've talked about. What is the role of the chair? The chair runs the meeting, so the chair kind of decides or introduces or asks folks to introduce themselves, and then they have the floor to speak or present. It helps with your meeting minutes, so when we look back, what were they doing 10 years ago? What were they doing last year? What did they do last week? You can see, how the motion was made, who seconded it, how the vote went, and any discussion that the commissioners had. And it also on the left, you'll see what we'll do. We'll have annotated agendas for you all, so you can see just kind of the role or how the Robert's Rules of Order work. I am not as much as an expert on this, but I know Lauren is. Are there other things you want to touch on? Lauren's much better at it than I am.
Yeah, so at least for the next month or so, we'll have all of your agendas saying like who needs to make the motion, who's gonna second, how it works. The biggest thing is really making sure that you're recognized before you speak, and anybody who speaks in the public meeting is recognized also. It's best not to just assume everybody knows who everybody is, but that you say who, like even staff, like the chair would call on me, I would say Lauren Snyder, Deputy County Manager, and then go forward. It helps everybody in the community have an understanding of who's speaking. Yeah, all motions have to have a second. Just because you do give a second doesn't mean that you support the motion. It just says that you're open to further discussion. So I think a lot of people are nervous. If you second a motion, it means you're gonna vote for it. It just means, yeah, let's have further discussion. We are doing, Robert's Rule. We're not going all the way, I would say, how we've been pretty lax on it. And so there's a lot of different motions that I don't think we're gonna or haven't adhered to, but it's really allowing the chair to move forward the meeting in an orderly fashion. So you won't be allowed to speak unless the chair recognizes you. No one is supposed to speak until the chair has recognized you. So just we can run through this once you all decide who's going to be chair. And we're happy to do some like scenarios and training on how you run things. You can also listen to past BOCC meetings. Thought Commissioner Fiedler did a great job of being chair and recognizing people, so those are all recorded meetings that if you wanna listen to them, you can kind of see how the flow goes. But did you all go over this at CCI at all? Yeah, okay.
That was the last day.
Mm.
Yeah. The audio kept cutting out on that Zoom. I was like,
The other little tip that I would mention that's often used is that the chair, when there are motions made and so forth, typically, it's not the chair making the motion, the chair calls for the motion, one of the other commissioners make, so, and typically then the third commissioner would be the one to second it if they wish to go forward with the discussion. And that usually is also the process in terms of when you take the vote on it, the chair is typically the last person to go.
Can anybody call for a motion? The chair?
Yeah,
Okay.
technically anybody can.
They said especially with small boards, Robert rules really applies to large ones, but in a small one, anybody can make the motion
Yes.
or second.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially because the quorum is only two of us, and if one of us is not here, we can still run it.
And it allows, for, if there is, a contentious item or something where there is disagreement among the board, it lets that, disagreement be had kind of in a, like, civilized and professional manner, right? Of allowing the other commissioner to speak, or when you get the second and then you're in that motion, you're in that discussion area, right? You can talk as long as you want, about something, or I think you guys saw it, like with Commissioner Edwards talking about the motocross track, right? You can talk about something like that before you cast your vote, and the reason why you're casting your vote. So it gives the board ability to do that, or individual commissioners, I should say, through that process. It's also a way to facilitate discussion among the board. If you guys know that there's an issue maybe you all agree on, but you have varying opinions, or you wanna make a point, great, or you have disagreements, and you wanna let those out or let your opinion be known before the vote is taken.
And just say like during work sessions, obviously we're more lax. Robert's rules, we really are really doing them during regular or special meetings when there's votes taken, et cetera. We certainly could do it during work sessions, just to allow the public to know who is saying what, which I think just has some accountability, but it does make things a little bit more challenging. You have to introduce yourself every time you say something, but it's up to the board how they wanna do that.
So we'll go through this, so there are three kinds of meetings that the county commissioners have. So you have regular meetings, which are your decision-making meetings. You have your work sessions like this, kind of the informational, educational sessions, and then what are called special meetings. Special meeting is basically a meeting that is not during your set regular hours when you set your regular meeting times. The board can call a meeting at any time with 24-hour public notice, so that's a special meeting. It's nothing, the only thing special about it is that it's not on your regular day, if you will. So on Friday, you guys will set when your regular meetings will be. We'll provide you with various examples of this, but statute requires that you meet at the county seat of the county. Leadville is our county seat, and that you do so at least one business day of each month. So what we have been doing is first and third Tuesdays are regular meetings, or the decision-making meetings. And then the second and fourth Tuesdays are work sessions, pertinent, to the board of what you guys wanna learn more about or take deep dives on. So that's kind of the schedule we've had, so work session, gather information, next meeting is a regular meeting, so you make informed votes, work session, regular meeting. Is the way we have been going, but on Friday you guys will decide what your set schedule will be, so the public knows when your regular work set, when your regular meetings are, and then also when your work sessions are, the regularly scheduled ones.
do you go over what the other counties are doing around us?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
we'll do
okay.
that today and then I think tomorrow and then on Friday, we'll talk about those as well, which we kind of touched on, so why Tuesdays? I don't know, but a lot of counties do their regular meetings on Tuesdays. So for example, Chafee starts, there's our kind of all-day meetings on Tuesdays, they start at 8:30. Summit are all-day meetings, they start at 9. Same with Eagle, they're all-day meetings with a break for lunch. Those are, conducted during business hours. And then when you wanna call like a special meeting, or if there's a meeting, you guys have talked about town halls, if you wanna set those town halls, right? Kind of pick the date and then work backwards from there, so that the board is prepared to meet with the public, staff is prepared to help, staff those meetings, staff those town halls, provide context and answers that you may or may not have at that point.
Of course, the requirement for any meeting that's outside of your published regular schedule is 24 hours advance notice.
Yeah.
So you at least that.
Which we'll spend some more time on, Chris will spend some more time on with sunshine laws and ethics, tomorrow on that 24-hour posting, kind of what an agenda item needs to look like, and what the meeting will look like. Oh, here we are. Your regular meetings are to discuss, deliberate, and vote on the agenda items. So this is an example of the regular meeting template we have used, so chair will open the meeting and then ask for the commissioners to approve the agenda. And then, ask staff if there are any changes to the agenda. There might be something that popped up at the last minute. We already have the agenda posted. I'll request that something comes off the agenda. Or the board will be like, we're not ready to make a decision on this yet. We're gonna punt this to another meeting or to a date certain. So opening the meeting, the board does need to vote on approval of the agenda, so if the agenda as posted, make the motion and second and vote on that. Then for community information items, what I would recommend for this going forward, after Friday when we do the annual appointments, whatever boards, committees, statewide things you guys sit on, we list those under your names, so then when the meeting comes up, like, do you have any community informational items, like, hey, I went to the EDC meeting, here's something really interesting that they're working on, so then your board members also know what's going on with those meetings and provide the updates that way. Or there's something going on in the community that, you think that is very important that folks know about. Things like that. Then we talk about public comments not on the agenda, or you open it up for the public to make public comments not on the agenda. So why we say not on the agenda, sometimes there will be land use files ahead of you where it is a publicly posted agenda item, and you guys will be during that process, you guys are in a quasi judicial process, so at the end you're sitting as the judges of it. So if you have someone coming and making public comment on something that is on the agenda, doesn't follow the process for it, so it could influence that process. So that's why we say not on the agenda. So to not interfere with that process or potentially your vote. Or if it's a land use applicant and in the southern part of the county and cause a lot of tension on that, there's a lot of people who wanna come and make comments, I could open the county up to liability, should your guys' vote be based on that, not based on the process.
So those public comments for whatever development will be set aside for a comment period just on that development. Because certainly people have the right to speak on it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, they can always, if they know there's something pending, they can always come to the general public comment time period and give public comment in front of all three of you, and that they can do. But the thing too about public comment is typically, you don't engage with the public during that public comment. You accept the comment, and if there's follow-up information you need or want something done on, then you usually refer it to staff first. Public comment is just to accept the information.
So if someone during the public comments not on the agenda starts to speak about something we shouldn't be hearing at the time, do we have to catch that and stop them, or will you guys be able to red flag it for us, or?
Well, I mean, they can, like, for example, if there's a land use matter that's on the agenda, they can come and say, hey, I know this is coming before you at some point in time and I wanna give my opinion on it. That's what the public comment is for. You don't engage, there isn't a dialogue
Okay.
during that time period with them. You just accept the information. If there are things that are stated in public comment that you would like more information on, then typically we recommend that you refer that to the appropriate staff member to follow up and report back to the whole board.
So maybe, Tim, could you just reiterate what you said before, where we're opening ourselves up to liability, cause I'm confused about that.
And you don't wanna comment on pending land matters during public comment.
Got it.
So that's why I'm saying public comment is just for the public to kind of provide you with comments.
Yeah.
Typically, the commissioners don't engage in a back and forth on
Right.
that.
And that's why we say, currently, the language is not on the agenda, so if something is on the agenda, it has gone through the process and folks have already had that opportunity to weigh in, whether it's planning commission, through other means to provide that feedback, especially like for land use, through community planning and development. So that's why, that was my comment, about that.
Yeah, because that's it, and I'm sorry, Tim, I didn't pick up on that, because with planning commission matters, when there are public hearings, they're held in a planning commission, but it's actually a joint public hearing with the commissioners. So the information is presented to both the planning commission and the commissioners at that same time. Then typically commissioners absent themselves, they leave, excuse themselves from the meeting while the planning commission deliberates and determines what recommendation they're going to make to the board as to approval with conditions, or recommend not approving the application.
Does that process happen in this room?
Yes.
Okay.
And are we asked to leave, or should we leave, or can we, can we stay?
You're asked to leave while the planning commission is making a decision.
Yeah.
So you'll hear the application, you'll hear the same information, and those meetings are recorded. So when it comes to the planning commission to make a vote or recommend something with conditions of approval or conditional approval, you all will leave. Then you can come back in after the vote. You can of course watch the recording after the meeting to see those things, and then all of that information staff provides with you as well of, this land use file came with these 17 conditional uses from the planning commission.
And then what's the best response if someone's speaking during public comment and they ask us questions? Like, do we just remain silent, or do we tell them, hey, I can't answer that right now?
Typically, the chair will say, the purpose of public comment is for y'all to provide the commissioners with information, comments and such. Request for additional information if they're asking questions, not to answer those questions. So typically, you won't be answering those questions if they're asked during public comment.
Is that a statute, or is that a cultural norm?
That is, it's kind of a hybrid of that because of the public hearing process. So if you know, for example, and sometimes it'll come up if somebody knows it's coming before the planning commission, say the next week or something, they might wanna come and give public comment to you, knowing that you'll be attending that meeting. And so we would caution you not to engage in communication, answering questions, or any dialogue during that type of public comment, because it hasn't come to you formally through the public hearing process. And so we don't want there to be any suggestion that you've already decided by answering their questions, however you might answer their questions and such, you've decided that application before evidence, if you will, has been presented to you in the public hearing.
So an example would be like if somebody comes up with a land use comment or question during public comment, the chair could say, thank you so much for asking that. One of our staff could get back to you about it, but currently we can't talk to you about it because of our quasi judicial role. But if it's not public land use, or if it's not land use and zoning, then, and somebody wanted to ask a question like, I don't understand why I can't find the child's basketball league sign up, and like, what are you all doing about that? That we could say like, oh, thanks so much for asking, this is something we've cared about, let us talk to staff and we'll get back to you.
Yes.
So it depends on if we're going to be in that quasi-judicial role, we have to avoid ex parte. And that's how we do it in public comment. But we
Yes.
can explain why we're not doing it,
Exactly.
Yes.
so that they don't feel alienated
Right.
or
Or
like
that you're
we're-
not, you're trying to avoid them, or you don't think
Right.
it's important and that kind of stuff.
Right, okay.
It's hard when you have folks who want their direct engagement, like I know that and understand that, but I think that what you just said is perfect, and even, being like, well, after this, does the manager have your contact information after this? He will follow up with you with
Right,
answering your questions,
Yeah.
things like that. Cause we always are responsive and want to be responsive, but I understand that it is hard when you guys are sitting there being like, oh, I really want to engage, but it is better practice to not on some of those, and it does make it hard. Up to the board if you want to,
Yeah, babe, what's your question?
Pete Day, this has always been a little unclear to me, public comment for items not on the agenda, I completely understand, the public hearing part, and if there's been an opportunity for the public to engage on a particular item, then that's off limits, but what about agenda items that, that pop up, that are brand new, that nobody's necessarily heard about? It's on the agenda, but it's not a, a public hearing agenda item, where do those fit? Because, I've heard different interpretations on that, whether a member of the public can be recognized for an item that's on the agenda that isn't in the bailiwick of, of public hearings and all of that stuff.
Decision making and that type of thing. Well, there are two things I'd say. A lot of times, items on the agenda have been vetted or discussed in a work session, and those are open to the public as well. But it's also within the discretion of the commissioners if it's not something that's pending like that if they want to accept like a
Okay.
comment.
So you can ask, but you don't
It's
know
up
what
to,
the,
it's up to them if they want to.
Yeah,
accept.
cause that's, it's just not clear, what it means when an item's on the agenda.
Mhm.
And maybe there's a way to
Right.
clarify that, because, I've attended a lot of these meetings and nobody ever asked on an agenda item whether there are any public comments. It's left up to the person to raise their hand, and I've never known whether that's appropriate or not, because it's on the agenda.
Well, and as Tim mentioned, part of it is that hybrid nature of the agendas is that sometimes they will include public hearings, like when you're doing ordinances and stuff such like that, they're on the agenda. That's going to be a public hearing and you'll take public comment. So there's not really a blanket way to describe that, and that's why this first section is for the items not on the agenda. And then for the items that are on the agenda, even if they're not public hearings or whatever, it's within the discretion
Gotcha.
of it, because public notice and public, attendance and stuff is an entitlement to public participation in the commentary of it. So, just because it's a public meeting doesn't mean that the public has a right to engage in dialogue related to the topics that are there, unless it's noticed as a public
So curious, is that a thing that we could change as a board, or would that be up to the individual chair if they're going to entertain public comment for items on the agenda?
I mean, you can
we
decide
make it a
if there's
custom?
certain things, as long as it's within your quasi judicial rules,
Totally, yeah.
where they're clearly statutory defined things that you have to do for a public hearing.
Mm-hmm.
It's up to your discretion if you want to accept public comment on other agenda items.
Yeah. So I appreciate, Pete, your comment. Pete, right?
Yeah.
Pete, I appreciate your comment about just knowing where you do have allowance to engage or not. And I feel like I have the same problem when I've tried to engage. It's like, well, this is going to be on the agenda later, will I have an opportunity to speak? And if you don't speak in the beginning, then you've lost your opportunity. If we could have on our agendas, like, public comment, like written out when it's allowed and when it's not allowed, just so that people could prepare themselves to make the decision of, oh, do I hold this until later, or is now my chance to say something? Would that solve that, Pete? What do you think?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
it's just distinguishing
totally,
what kind of agenda item it is and
Yeah.
whether, cause some, like I said, some of them are brand new that
Yeah.
never heard about before, but might have
yeah.
an opinion to express.
And it's all logical, what the system is, but also it could be a hindrance, like a bureaucratic hindrance to the public actually engaging.
We have to learn all these procedures, but I don't expect the public to.
Right, exactly.
My
We
only-
can, go ahead. No.
My only recommendation, just from how this has played out at the state legislature, is making sure people are actually speaking to the agenda item.
Yeah.
I think if people didn't say something during public comments for things not on the agenda, they'll take time
Totally.
to talk about whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and it really derails your ability to get business done. So just being like the chair being like,
Super on it.
if it's not about what we're talking about right now, then
Thank you so much, I hear what
Another
you're saying, this is not an appropriate time.
Yeah.
Gonna have to move on from you.
We'll talk about this a little bit more too, when we talk about open meetings, laws and the notices. That's why you need to be as specific as possible about your items that are on the agenda, give as much
Yeah.
detail as possible, so that way people know what to expect, number one, it gives them advance notice, but also it allows you, whoever the chair is, to control that dialogue from getting too far astray.
Yeah, okay.
And I think you all touched on this with Liz, and we'll go over it again with Teams for everything that's in your packets and all of that, so you have access to that information. So each agenda item will have, if it's a contract, it'll have the contract or professional services agreement in there. It will also include a memo from staff, and so that every agenda item will have this memo in there with its 4 sections, so background, topic for the presentation, budget, and then action. So background is kind of high level, where this agenda item is coming from. Then the topic for the presentation is, so background, we need this specialty type of psychologist to be able to provide evaluations for children in Spanish. Topic for the presentation, we have found this provider who is credentialed, who has all of this. This is, we recommend or requesting a not to exceed amount for the professional services agreement. And then it comes to the budget piece. So most everything that you will see in the next couple months will be budgeted requests, meaning that it will, there should be one on there that says this is budgeted, this is unbudgeted. So if it's budgeted, it means that department director has planned out for their year, that they know that they're going to have this agreement, they need this kind of service, they put it into their 2025 budget. It has gone through review with the manager's office and the attorney's office, and it is ready for the commissioners to make a decision on. The action section, right, decision, so BOCC vote, informative, sometimes things fall and it's just an informative item for you guys. You just, you acknowledge it and you can go on, so informative and acknowledgement are kind of the same. Or then also staff direction of, it could either be, hey, we're not really ready to vote on this yet, we need to see X, Y, and Z, alright, we can do that. Or, it's a, perhaps it's a presentation, right, the cost to replace the tiles at the skate park, where you're like, that's a crazy number, I need to see more bids, show me that it's a different way, right? So providing that staff direction in the meetings.
Where does live in the computer here?
So that'll be in Teams,
Teams, Okay,
and it'll be under your regular meetings.
okay,
You'll have, and then each agenda item will be broken out into its own folder.
okay,
And in there, you'll have a resolution, memo, the professional services agreement, contract, whatever it is, whatever other materials it is that you're making a decision on will be in there.
The other thing that we're starting this year is if it is unbudgeted, that BOCC is gonna have to give direction about where that money's gonna come from. So are you gonna pull from a different department? Pulling it from your general fund reserve? So really having just a little bit more accountability when we approve things that are not in the budget. Where it doesn't grow on trees, so where are we pulling it from, so.
We'll talk more about that one tomorrow when we do budget and finance, what that process looks like. Cause unless there is, sometimes as we're planning out an annual budget, sometimes, things come up and you're like, didn't budget for the compactor at the landfill to stop working. And Wagner can't fix it. So some of those bigger ticket items, other times throughout the year, opportunities come up that may meet the BOCC's guidance and priorities. Or it could be coming straight from the board too. We really wanna see this, okay? We'll provide recommendations of where that funding can come from. So we touched on a little bit this morning about ordinances. An ordinance would happen during a regular or special meeting. So part of it is, drafting the ordinance. We really wanna see, come up with a law, what you guys wanna see locally for Lake County. So, Chris and I, mainly Chris, will work on drafting what that ordinance language looks like, see if it meets the intent of the commissioners. Once we get through, work sessions on that of the drafts of the ordinance, public meetings and all that. So then we actually have a real draft of the ordinance that the board is comfortable with. So we do a public notice and we do a public hearing. You guys gotta do a vote for adoption, the publication of the adopted ordinance with that effective date, and then the codification and enforcement. So we, Chris, I believe I've sent it to you previously, but I'll re-up it for you. Chris did a memo on ordinance adoption, the timeline, what it looks like, when to use it, when to, if there's other options as well. Touched on this again this morning, so the resolution, so non-regulatory purposes, but administrative things, so annual budget resolution is the biggest one. Any of the policies that we have, so the employee handbook, P-card policy, financial policies, grant policy, any policy that the board adopts would be done via resolution. Then proclamations, right? Just a ceremonial statement to, recognize, significant events, individuals or causes. Every year we do a proclamation, we did a resolution this year for, Colorado Gives Day, proclamation declaring it Leadville History Day, whatever, things like that.
Does the community come to us with those, or have they all originated from the board?
Generally it comes from the community, but other times, it can come from the board, so,
Yeah.
perhaps you guys wanna do a proclamation of thanks to Commissioners Edwards, Mudge and Fiedler, right? You guys could do that. Or if there's, someone really impactful in our community who just passed, perhaps it is a way to thank them and their family for service to Lake County community. Or if you wanna promote, a big event in the community or something, proclaiming it Boom Days or whatever.
Mhm.
Okay, so the public hearing, So this is the part where you can gather that input, have transparency, before you make these, decisions. So a public hearing is required for adopting the ordinances, approving the budget, making zoning changes, and then liquor licensing. So for the public notice, we need to post those at least 10 days in advance. So we post those in the Herald Democrat. We post them on our website. There's also hard copies available for the public's review in the clerk and recorder's office. Liquor licensings are the ones you've probably seen maybe at establishments in the community, right? They'll put up a big poster and saying, you know, applying for or reapplying for a liquor license, and that's part of the public notice process. For the budget, statutorily by October 15th of the, every year, the budget officer needs to present a draft budget to the BOCC. That starts the public hearing, for, the next year's, budget. So we'll present to you guys in October, the draft budget. And we do a bunch of work sessions in between and all that between, before adoption in December. So we have a long, period there. Same with ordinances have a, this is, that has to be open, yeah. Alright, during regular meetings, and special meetings, you can also call an executive session. So an executive session is when you close, the meeting, from the public to discuss specific matters that are exempt from public disclosure. So personnel matters, matters subject to attorney-client privilege, negotiations, security arrangements, and real estate transactions. So for example, when the previous board was considering the purchase of the Elm Street properties, to keep that housing local, we had several executive sessions on that, where the board provided guidance to me and Chris on what that real estate transaction should look like. They also provided guidance to me and Chris on what those negotiations should look like, and then we negotiate on behalf of the board. Security arrangements, I think this one was kind of post 9/11, and they meant for them like, you know, bigger events, like state house events, things like that, but you know, should we have, you know, a high profile visit from the president, and you guys could have an executive session on security arrangements for that, so I think they come with their own security, but you never know. Matters subject to attorney-client privilege, so Chris serves as the county attorney. All communication with her is subject to attorney-client privilege. From time to time, she will need to come tell you guys some things.
Yeah, and that's it's not all communications with the county attorney is subject to attorney-client privilege, there are certain categories of it. But that's why this is so that have the ability to provide y'all with information on pending matters that are sensitive and contain information, especially negotiating and litigation and that type of thing, that would not be subject to public disclosure at that time, so.
And then for personnel matters, it could be part of, you know, an employment claim, things like that, which would be attorney-client privilege on that. But then also, both mine and Chris's performance reviews are conducted by the board, so those are done generally in executive session.
Now, the one exception with personnel matters is if it does relate to a specific individual, employee or such, that they have the right to say they want it to be public. So even if you wanna talk to them in an executive session, if they say, no, I want this out in public, they have the right to do that.
Same with you two.
Yeah, if we wanted to do that.
But then the board could vote to go into executive
Is that
session.
section with it? Yeah. And the thing about executive session, the one thing to keep in mind too with these is that the only item up there that allows you to not record executive sessions are when it is subject to attorney-client privilege. And so in those instances, and sometimes you'll see executive sessions noticed with more than one of these code sections, like it's a personnel matter, or if it's attorney-client stuff, and then negotiations and such. So you'll have that, both of those, and then it's up to me to certify after the executive session as to whether the topic was subject to attorney-client privilege and therefore not recorded. And sometimes I'll give introductory statements once we go into executive session, depending on what topics you wanna talk about. Well, okay, this part would be subject to attorney-client privilege, but this part is. And you also have to be cautious with the executive sessions of who you want to be present for those. As long as they're county staff or agents that have been engaged by the county for that specific topic or something, you can still classify it as privileged if it's, the attorney certifies that. But if you invite people from outside of the county to participate, then it's not subject to privilege, and therefore would need to be recorded, and that recording would be subject to business disclosure.
So where are these held? The executive sessions
Yeah.
that are
In here.
Thank you.
in this room? No,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I understand that. I meant the recordings.
Oh,
Where's the
recordings.
recordings?
They are, and they're separately recorded. So if you go into executive session, the
Right.
recording for the regular part of the meeting stops.
Right,
Then you pick up a recording, and then they should be tagged as, in the recordings, as to whether it's an executive session or a regular meeting.
If there's an account, we'll just save it in the cloud.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Those are not subject to Cora request,
It depends on the topic, yeah, no, but recordings are, any type of recordings are subject to Cora unless they fall into one of the exceptions, and one of the exceptions is attorney-client privilege.
It was suggested at CCI to put, how you have to post an executive session in your agenda. It was suggested that, you can say, an executive session may be called at this time to allow for, for timeliness of executive sessions that may need to come up. And I said they use it very rarely, but it's nice to have it on the agenda so it is an option, even if you don't, as long as you move into executive session, you are clear about what the executive session is.
And the open meetings law requires the notice to be specific as to the topics to be discussed, so if you wanted to reserve the right to go into an executive session, you need to provide as much information about what may be discussed in that executive
Right.
session without defeating the purpose of the executive session.
Right, yeah.
So a lot of times you'll see language to say, it's, as it says here, it talks about, where you were before, but the type of language that'll be in your agenda, that the commissioners may go into executive session to discuss,
Blank.
And these, and when we have done executive sessions in the past, they're generally always at the end of the meeting,
Mm-hmm.
so,
have
everybody
to
who's
call
listening
people
in
back.
and hanging out, go there. So then it is important when you come out of the executive session, like Chris was saying, she will certify on the record what was discussed. If the board made a decision in executive session, we need to say what that decision was. And if you're providing staff guidance, we would say, we came out of executive session, we discussed negotiations for the purchase of real property, and the board voted to pursue acquiring real property and have directed the county manager and the county attorney to negotiate for this property with a not to exceed amount of $500,000. And then we have the whole, not exhaustive, but like the big list that covers a lot of them of, like the first one for purchase of property, receiving legal advice, other confidential matters, security arrangements, investigations, negotiations, personnel matters.
Any further questions?
So our timeline for regular meetings, we have an expectation with staff that all agenda items are reviewed and approved by Chris and I 1 week prior to the meeting. That gives Chris and I the time to make sure everything is done in alignment with the board's goals, things are within budget, all of that the memos are drafted to provide the right information. So at the end of regular meetings and work sessions, Sandra will go over the next week's agenda and calendar to be reviewed with the commissioners. This is also, an opportunity of like, hey, we really need to talk about this, can we punt something or move something else, or how can we schedule this? Or, cause we'll do the agenda review, should have the agenda built for you guys, we'll go through that agenda. It'd be like, these 3 contracts, like I'm not comfortable on making a vote on yet. I need this kind of information before making a decision. So there's also an opportunity for the board to talk about the next week's agenda. Not make decisions on those agenda items, like approving a contract or something like that, but making a decision of like, I think it's too soon that we have this on the agenda. Things like that.
But ultimately, isn't it up to the chair to set the agenda?
It has been, the way we have operated has been with the board. So you're gonna get a lot of agenda items from staff, so contracts, agreements, things like that, policy changes, right, recommendations to the board. And then there's gonna be things from the board as well. We really need to see this. We need to review this policy, and we want it done in this timeline. So really it's that's why we do the calendar review with the full board calendar and agenda review. There may be things from time to time, like if we go through the meeting, it's Friday afternoon, and before we post things, we're trying to get everything posted on Thursdays, we're getting there. Slowly but surely we're getting there. But there might be something that pops up where I'm like, shoot, I totally forgot something that really needed to be on the agenda. It just got away from me, so that's when I would like reach out to the chair, be like, hey, can I add this to the agenda?
Sweet, okay.
That way. So it's a group effort, team effort on that.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then that way too, it also is helpful when we're reviewing the agenda for staff, right? If there's a specific contract or PSA and you 3 all have 5 different questions about it, oh, okay, that's very informative for us to be better prepared for the board. The consent agenda, so consent agendas are just streamlined portions of the meeting. So generally, routine, non-controversial items that can be approved with a single vote rather than going through each one individually and adding time to the meeting and things like that. So we have the minutes, payroll, and accounts payable are put onto the consent agenda. So you'll see there, right, approval of the payroll for November 15th, 2024, the accounts payable packets, and all of these are in your in Teams as well, so you can review those as well. Should you have questions on any of those things, that would be an appropriate time to bring it up, or you can bring things straight to me of like, hey, I see that we're paying this vendor for electronic health records, like, why do we do that? Then I can provide that answer of why public health uses electronic health records for the services and things they provide. We are getting in a better routine of minutes with the deputy clerk and recorder, Cindy Quintana. I think she will be a staple at your meetings going forward. So we are getting, I think we're going to get new board, new beginning on a, more timely approval of that, so then when those are approved, we can post the minutes immediately to the website.
Is she just transcribing the video?
So she sits in here with us. She has so we record the Zoom and then she has her own recording software, but essentially not transcribe their action minutes, so
Actions taken,
yeah, so the actions taken, who
votes.
made the motion, who seconded it, votes in favor, votes against, that kind of stuff. If there's a lot of discussion, you know, sometimes they add in like a little bit of like context descriptor, but otherwise it's more action minutes.
Is that like a big drain on the clerk's office, having someone in here to manually do all that? Like I've recently learned about software that records and automatically transcribes minutes in place of a person.
That is something that I'm happy for the board to bring up again with the clerk and recorder.
It's her job, it's like her statutory job to
Yeah.
make sure that our action minutes are recorded.
Yeah.
So it's up to her how she wants to make that happen.
Okay.
We couldn't tell her like, hey, you have to use this software.
And I've provided ideas like that in the past. So
Gives us.
it's possible, definitely possible, from the efficiency standpoint.
The consent agenda, usually it's voted on in like as a block. You can always make a motion though to peel off any certain items. You can say, I move to adopt the consent agenda, but I'd like to pull off like number 2 and move it to the regular agenda or something. So if you have like consternation about one of them, you can absolutely move it to the normal agenda where you have formal votes, conversation, and then move the rest as kind of a block.
Special meetings, I touched on this a bit, can be called by the chair or any two of the commissioners. Generally convene to address urgent or specific issues that can't wait until the next regular meeting. So there are instances, there's not the board hasn't delegated any contract signing authority, you know, to me or to anyone else in the county. But there are times that things pop up where we are in urgent need of a service or a professional service agreement, like for human services, that we need the board to call us. We will request the board to call a special meeting to hopefully approve that contract or professional services agreement. There could also be something or something that the chair or 2 commissioners, you know, deem urgent that needs to be addressed. We still have to follow all the same public posting, 24-hour notice, all of that. But it's generally used to get a contract approved before the next regular meeting.
So that's different than an emergency meeting, like if there's a fire.
Yes.
You call a meeting right away.
Yes, and we will take a deep dive in that with Claire, who's our Office of Emergency Management Director. So there are certain thresholds there, right, as we'll go through the emergency annexes and the emergency operations plan and then activated the emergency operations center. But yes, but technically you still need to follow the same posting rules in that. There are some ways that you guys can waive those to act in emergency. So if there is a fire, we need to activate the emergency operations center, things like that, we can act quickly. Then you just have to basically go back, do a posting, do that and kind of redo it. Is that a fair overview of it? So there are times when you can waive that public posting requirement in an emergency. Work sessions, we did your first one this morning, we'll continue on those over the next couple weeks. But you know, this is really for you guys, engagement and discussions, consideration, reviews, evaluations, items of interest to the board and to the community. So no votes or formal decisions are made by commissioners at work sessions. However, you can provide staff guidance on certain things. or on any of the topics. Hey, we wanna continue this conversation, it's really important to continue discussing housing with CMC. You know, the capital requests, they really need to be way more fleshed out. We wanna see these 3 things in all of those requests, that kind of stuff. Or giving guidance on, if you guys all, you know, if the board's feeling comfortable of like, okay, you know, we give the guidance that this should be on a decision-making meeting coming up. We're good on this topic, we can move forward on it. But you're not taking a vote, you're not taking that formal action. You can give guidance.
Is the discussion informal? Or does the chair run it, or can anybody talk at any point? Including Pete?
Great question, that is up to the board and kind of up to the chair as you guys define that role. If we want it more formal, right, you'll generally always have the presentations beforehand. Let's say it's the Forest Service coming to give an update on their mitigation projects in the county, right? So we'll have information from them prior to your meeting, that'll be in the packet. Generally, that guest will give their presentation, board asks questions, you know, requests further details, things like that. Could be, you know, you have someone in the public who's joined the meeting, because they're wonderful and concerned citizens. And, you know, they wanna make comment. It's kind of up to the board. We have been much more informal with that in the past. You know, it is great having citizens show up and be engaged, so, you know, we should hear from them, but that's up to the board. Cause some items too, right, so there's you know, it could put you into an awkward position, but there's nothing wrong with being awkward and then having that transparent and honest conversation with someone. So there's that to think about too, but kind of how the board wants to do things.
Awesome.
Yeah. Alright, Board of Health, so in smaller counties, the Board of Health, is generally the Board of County Commissioners. It's you 3, but with a different hat on. So this oversees public health in our community. You guys could, if you wanted, appoint a separate Board of Health, but I would recommend not. So this, we meet quarterly for this. We'll go over in the beginning of February with Julia and Kelsey and Lauren. Board of Health, kind of the roles, the decision making you make there, because there's both the human health aspect of it, so vaccines, women's health, providing public health services to the community, but then there's also environmental health considerations. On-site wastewater treatment systems, so septic systems, how are those regulated, inspected, childcare facility inspections, restaurant inspections, right? So public health is very broad in Colorado, but those will be topics that the Board of Health will talk about. And then Dr. Lisa is our medical officer, so Julia at Public Health, is she APN or RN?
No, I think she just started.
Alright, so Public Health Director is a registered nurse, but there are certain things that Dr. Lisa can provide those services under the umbrella of public health, but Julia can also practice at higher levels in her license under Dr. Lisa's medical license. Board of Equalization, so the Board of Equalization in smaller counties is kind of tended to be the Board of County Commissioners. You know, we've each kind of talked about this a little one-offy, and we'll take a deeper dive when Mark, the assessor, comes and presents. So this board meets as needed, so this is really the place for residents to protest their property valuations. You will see on Friday where we will appoint the Board of Equalization, but also arbiters for this. So arbiters would be independent folks we kind of have on retainer, we don't pay them unless we use them, to come in and assist with making decisions on those protests. Otherwise, it's you three.
Is there any issue of crossover around our quasi judicial understanding of land, like decision making of land use and our Board of Equalization? Since we're like determining the value of somebody's property, like of their land, does that have anything to do with building and land use?
No, because it would only be, I think if somebody were to challenge the valuation based on how it's classified. And they'd say, this is vacant land, but it's been classified as improved or something like that.
Okay.
There may be some crossover with CPD where you would need to get input from them as to whether or not the classification, the type of use falls within the corporate code.
Okay.
But,
But you're not determining actual use of the
No.
land so there wouldn't be any of that.
Right.
Okay.
And similar, Commissioner Lee, you brought up about like zoning changes or that appeals process, so broadly, the process starts with the assessor. You can go into the assessor and be like, this is BS, my property should not be valued this. Then Mark, within his authority, his statutory authority, can make a determination to keep it the same, go up, or go down. If the property owner doesn't like that, then they can come to the County Board of Equalization. You'll hear from the assessor, you'll hear from the landowner. If it is the board sitting as the CBOE, you guys will make a decision, or the arbiters will make a decision. It's a little more independent, but they can make a decision. They're licensed appraisers, this is their wheelhouse. If they don't like the County Board of Equalization's decision, they can appeal to the State Board of Equalization, which is
the
nine.
Board of Assessment
The
Appeals.
Board of Assessment Appeals,
Yeah.
yes. So there's, go all the way to the top. And since 2025 is a revaluation year, you will probably see some protests.
Yeah.
Alright. Planning Commission, so Lake County Land Development Code, and statute, establishes that the board shall appoint a planning commission. So there are 5 members and 2 alternates, that the Board of County Commissioners, appoints. So you will see that on your meeting on Friday. I believe there are 2 appointments to the Planning Commission. And Ann will be here to talk about those, and I think some of the applicants themselves might be here as well to talk about their interest and why they wanna serve on Planning Commission. So the BOCC attends all the Planning Commission meetings as non-voting members. So the Planning Commission meetings happen in this room. So they're the second and fourth Monday, they start at 4 p.m. Where you hear from staff and land use applicants on their application, planned unit development, PUD, subdivisions, backcountry zoning, approvals, things like that. And then that is where the planning commission asks the VOCC to step out while they deliberate and then vote. Part of the commissioner stepping out is so that you're not sitting here influencing the planning commission's vote, essentially. Should something get passed by the planning commission, then it gets recommended to the Board of County Commissioners, and then it comes to you for the final decision. The planning commission is it's an advisory board on land use. Did this land use applicant, follow our code? Did they meet, all the objectives in code? Are there variances that needed to be considered that either the Board of Adjustment heard or didn't heard that are within the purview of CPD to make recommendations on? Are there conditions of approval that the planning commission can put on the applicant? Like when the Silver King was purchased and converted from a hotel into housing. The planning commission put conditional uses on there. And that part of one of those was that they had to set aside 6 units for Lake County. Broadly, that can be open for Lake County workforce, Lake County government workforce, transitional housing, other opportunities for community members to have that housing. So the planning commission can make those conditional uses on those applications as well.
Melissa, come on up here.
Sure.
I can see better if I come up there.
Yeah, probably. So, contract administration is through the county attorney's office and, Sandra Pettis, the executive, and then assists with the contract administration. Melissa Decker, the deputy county attorney, is the initial lead on the contracts, the requests that come in, so she and Sandra process those together, make sure all the parts and pieces and stuff are there. Melissa reviews them and, collects it, sends it to me for a second survise, at which point, after it's been reviewed, then we essentially authorize it to go and be put on an agenda if necessary, or to go back to the contractor if we need more information and so forth. But I asked Melissa to come today since she lives in most of the weeds of the contract and administration stuff to help go through the administration process and, what it's intended for.
And we do lots of them. Right now, we're reviewing pretty much every contract that comes in. This is in a later slide, but we ask department representatives who are looking for a contract to fill out a memo. And that's new, and it's extremely helpful. It is one page, sometimes it floods onto the top of the second page, but it's, hey, what are you asking for? So that, because sometimes in the old days, 6 months ago, we used to get a draft and be like, not sure what they're looking for. So when the department has to write down one page, it gives us a fighting chance then to just look at the darn thing, fix it up how it needs to be and move on. So that's been a really big first step for us. But these are why contract administration matters. Stewardship of public funds. You guys are newly sworn in, but you already know there are grumblings. How are you spending money? Are we spending too much money? And having a process for contracts is a really important piece of that. Hey, do we need this? What's it for? Type of thing. And transparency, everybody's favorite word. So we want people to understand what's going on. Second bullet, we have a procurement policy, which is fancy for, hey, county wants some stuff. Here's how you go about doing it. Is it budgeted or unbudgeted? You already heard a little bit of that. But procurement policy is 7-8 pages of bullet points that tell departments and you guys how these things are done. Sure, you're asking for something, great, it might be budgeted, we like that. It might be unbudgeted, we worry about that a little more. But here are the steps. And that's really helps all of us avoid sort of allegations of favoritism, like, okay, nothing, we got this 8 pages, read it. It's the same for everybody. BOCC has the sole authority to commit funds to enter into a contract. You could delegate that, there are certain dollar values that you could say, hey, Tim gets to make these decisions, or department heads get to make those decisions. But last bullet point, any individual who makes a purchase or enters into a financial obligation for the county without a valid contract may be held personally responsible for such financial obligations. So we're not only protecting ourselves, we're protecting the other person who we're contracting with. Because contracts are like, here's what we're doing, paying you this, and here's what you're doing. And there are details that are set forward. So.
What is the, oh gosh, I'm sorry, I'm a little pillow-heady.
Oh no.
But what if that has happened in the past? Like, what's the auditing for that, or how do we go back and right-size that policy against how things have been done?
Yeah, that has been a big focus over the last couple of years because Tim started and I came on board and we noticed there was not a consistent process for the contracting. And also, as we talked about this morning too, making sure that the appropriate people were signing those contracts and knowing what they were committing to do. So if we discover that there isn't a contract in place and someone is providing services to the county, then we typically take immediate action to go and put that contract in place if they're going to be continuing to provide services to the county.
Okay.
And we've done a lot of work of undoing past boss hog style deals, and implementing contracts, and part of that piece to you, so we'll talk about this tomorrow with finance, but that, and I know you guys will touch on it, but the kind of the life cycle of a contract, right? AP gets an invoice, right? So when accounts payable gets an invoice, it is sent to them with the coding and the approval of that department director. If it doesn't have, including elected officials, if it doesn't have that stuff, AP rejects it until they get that information. So let's say they get that information, they get the coding, then accounts payable looks and says, we don't have a contract with Mount Bullock Construction. What is this for? What are we doing? So that we've been able to build in an internal way to control that risk and control that, so that accounts payable can kick that back. If it's flagged there, and it's sent to the department director, deputy or finance director as well, and then if it needs to, it escalates to me and Chris. And then we ponder our lives and wonder where we went wrong.
Okay.
I love this slide, I just, not to interrupt Melissa, but also this cartoon, I can't tell you how many times this actually has come up in my career with doing contracts where, somebody signs a contract and all of a sudden it's not going great, they wanna know how to get out of it. And so it's like, well, did you have it reviewed by a lawyer or something that, well, no, did you read it? Well, no. And so it's kind of,
Some of them.
somebody, the person who proposed it to you did and know exactly what it said, and that's why the joke here is, it talks about poor Dilbert saying it's so complicated, that no normal human can comprehend it, so it would be cost effective to bring the lawyers in to take a look at it and advise you, so I'll just take a chance and sign it, the guys like Doc scrub in, I got the liver, cause you gotta be careful about signing away rights and promising things that aren't consistent with your contract administration policy and procedures. So, anyway, Melissa.
But these are some of the reasons that we care about, looking at contracts, other than sort of avoiding the embarrassment after the fact of people coming in and being like, sure, I signed it, no idea what it says. Communication, ensuring that all parties understand the contract terms and conditions. We try to talk in English as often as we can, so mortals can understand it, not just lawyers. Risk management, sometimes we get contracts from vendors that are not very Englishy. And we wanna make sure that everybody understands the risks, and we're gonna flag things, for the department, for you guys that are like, ooh, yeah, that 75-page software contract, it says these 10 terrible things. If you guys are cool with that, you go ahead and sign away. But we wanna make sure you know what the horrible things in there are. Change management, maintaining a record of all changes made to the contract during the drafting and negotiation phases. Chris and I peddle in redlining and blue lining. And if you guys don't know what that is, count yourself enormously blessed. But it is, we make changes and there are multiple drafts and then it goes to the vendor, and sometimes it's the vendor, sometimes it's the vendor's legal, sometimes that slows it down for 2 months. It's not fast sometimes, because there are other parties involved. So that was contract monitoring, negotiation, representing the county's interest to ensure that the contract terms are fair. The legal department will go back and forth sometimes with the vendor, sometimes with the vendor themselves if it's a mom and pop, sometimes with the vendor's legal if it's not a mom and pop, and again, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes we tell you guys, can we find somebody else? If they're being too prickly and wanting us to sign something that you shouldn't sign. Defining contract objectives and scope, ensuring that the contract meets all the needs of the parties. Hey, why are you signing this? Shouldn't it include these 15 other paragraphs? That's a lot of what we do, is here's the other stuff you need in here to protect yourselves. Contract administration helps the county manage its budget and reduce liability risks. Because contracts sometimes go bad, we wanna think about why they might go bad and make sure that those contracts protect the county. It also ensures that contracts are transparent and reported in accordance with county policy. Everything we do is recorded next door. So people are like, oh, I didn't understand how this happens. Well, it's recorded. Learn to love iCounty, it's there.
And that's something that has gotten so much better too during Tim's tenure and working towards that, because still today, it's like someone will say, how did we get into this? And you start researching iCounty, you can't figure that out because you can't find anything in there that pertains to how we got to the place we are with a certain vendor, or if we've done a lease or something like that. So that's why we've gotten this whole structure that's been put into place with contract administration as a direct response to issues that we have had in the last few years with determining how contracts are being handled by the county and who's signing and who's making obligations and stuff like that.
Could you give us an example of like something hypothetical maybe, that would be a reason you would advise us against signing a contract from a vendor?
Sure, you have a vendor who provides you with a contract, and a good example is like Melissa used the example of like software vendors and stuff like that, people who sell software as a service type of thing. And if you look at their user agreements and stuff, 99.9% of them can have provisions in there that say that number one, there's no warranty, so they don't care if it works for you or not. Number two, if you use it and it somehow messes up your whole system, they're not responsible. Even if they were the ones that made a mistake or something in it, that you, essentially, they're not taking responsibility. And three, that you're gonna indemnify them if something messes up and somebody tries to sue them for it. And so that's a big no for me, whenever I see somebody who's trying to make the county take responsibility for their work that we're paying them to do. So that's one we often have to negotiate a lot. The other thing too is Colorado law does not allow you to indemnify other parties. As a commissioner, you cannot take on any debt or liability for another party. It has to be solely within the county. So if we're negotiating with someone and the last sticking point is a provision in their contract that says that we will indemnify them, what I typically do is say, okay, we'll keep that, but it has to say at the beginning, to the extent allowed by applicable law. So that way, if something goes south and they try to say, you indemnify that, no, Colorado law doesn't allow us to do that, so it's not effective in that way. So that's a big one.
Adding tricky phrases is important.
Yes.
Go for it.
Well, I was just gonna say, and so this is an excerpt, table from our current procurement contract policy that shows the different levels of expenditures, whether they be budgeted or not. Now, this is the who can authorize the expenditures. Authorize is different from signing contracts, okay? Every contract has to be reviewed by legal, and every contract, unless you delegate to somebody else, has to be approved by the BOCC and signed by at least the chair. So, but this gives you an idea of the different types of procurement procedures. Now, there are a few exceptions to this that, for example, if, let's say, Chaffey County's got a vendor who's doing great work for them and we need something quick, we can piggyback on their contracts as long as that vendor will provide us with the same terms and conditions, so that we don't have to go out potentially to do an RFP or something. If it's a sole source, where they're the only ones in this area that are providing the service that we need, we don't have to go out to an RFP for that. But this just gives you kind of an idea of the different levels of purchasing and what the process is for that.
Could you, this is gonna be a pretty basic, new question, but could you elaborate on what an RFP is, a request for proposal?
Yes.
What is that?
So there's the RFP, request for proposal. It's where we invite service providers or vendors to make proposals to the county for providing either goods, services, or both, that type of thing, okay? If it's just a good, like Michael Irwin wants to buy a piece of equipment or something for road and bridge, whatever, you can get bids for that sometimes, just bids, and that's an RFP instead of RFP.
It's a sales pitch.
It kind of, well, but what it is that proposal, they submit, and it's usually, we want at least 3 different, proposals to show that it's a valid RFP process. Those then are vetted. The proposals that come in are vetted by essentially a committee through that department, perhaps the county manager, someone from our office or whatever. Will review them and score them essentially as to how they meet certain criteria. within the request for proposal. It'll tell them when a request for proposal is submitted or issued out there, it will tell you, if you're gonna bid on this, your bid has to include A through Z. It tells them what it has to, and that's part of the scoring. Did they include A through Z? Or, so that we have the opportunity to compare apples to apples versus someone thinking it's this apple, it's somebody else thinking it's this orange. So they are vetted, they are scored, and then staff will come and make a recommendation as to which bid they recommend the commissioners accept for that. And then if that is accepted, that proposal that they made becomes a part of the contract process, because usually what happens is then the services, a professional services agreement is drafted, and that proposal is attached as the exhibit that is the scope of services they're going to provide to the county. So that they can submit that proposal, then you start negotiating contract, and you're like, well, now that we looked at it, we need to change the prices or this, that, and the other. So the request for proposal, their proposal needs to be pretty accurate in terms of what, especially when it comes to the cost. And you'll see a lot of those contracts, proposal comes in and they say, we're gonna do it for X. The services agreement is gonna say not to exceed of X, so that they come in and they cannot change the pricing or the cost of the services.
Will this apply to aspects of the renovation of this building? Okay,
Yes, it will.
makes sense now. Thank
So,
you, wonderfully explained.
Yeah, try to, and again, it's equity. One thing about government contracts that you need to know too is this is another reason for this and with the RFP process is everybody has to be treated equally. You can't say, hey, I know my buddy didn't submit a proposal, but I'd really like him to do this job, and so we wanna take them instead of the bidder. Or we have this actual situation happen where on a construction project, the person taking the bids got one in and gave it to someone that they really wanted to get the job, gave a copy of somebody else's proposal so they could essentially underbid them. And that's a violation of government procurement laws. So this ensures that everybody is handled the same, that it's got that, fairness about it. And and it doesn't mean that when somebody does a proposal that you have to accept the lowest bid. Because sometimes we don't, because you might get folks come in and they'll make a proposal, but then when you look at the details of the scope of services or the goods and stuff that they're providing, it isn't the quality that you want. So you can depart from the lowest bid. Obviously, whenever you get the lowest bid with the best quality, that's what you want to do, but you're not constrained to have to choose the lowest bidder. If you don't, though, you have to justify why you're not. You gotta say, we want to choose these folks because they are also, so this is better within what the county needs.
Do procurement laws dictate how many RFPs you should accept?
No. You can take as many as you want. And I'll just say, we're not usually that blessed. Not get any, and when we don't get any, we say, okay, why doesn't anybody want to do this work? We have to look at the scope of the project.
Internet went out.
What'd you say, Laura?
It's all on our website too.
Yeah, that we'll describe, but yes, it is published, it's published on the website, and it's also published in the Herald Democrat, just a list of proposals. Now technically, you just have to have it out there for 10 days. So, it doesn't have to be, out there for a month or two or something like that, so.
So it just in the paper, it would look like we're requesting RFPs for more comfortable BOCC room chairs.
Yeah, strike out the word
Yeah,
We just need new ones.
yeah, but the other side to it too is that with that, if we're just looking for equipment, goods versus services or goods and services, typically we'll do a request for bids for that because we don't care about the services, we just want the quality of the product. And we have a purchase order, that once those bids are accepted, we can issue a purchase order to get those goods. It's when there's services involved or goods and services, like with, IT related equipment, sometimes, you need the services to actually install the equipment that you're getting and stuff like that, so you might have those hybrid ones. But we also do a lot of professional services to supplement or to, when we don't have the scope of expertise in-house, and we engage professionals outside to bring the services to care.
I see professional services as a line item on the budget all the time, so
Right. That's our most common thing that we do. And I'd asked Sandra to look, just so you don't have an idea of what we're talking about here, in terms of to go through and count how many contracts we did in 2024, just contracts, we were 168. So we do a lot of business with folks outside of county, 168. So that's why Melissa's most of her time chained to her desk reviewing. All right, any more questions about this part of it?
What would be an example of a department director spending $900 for an unbudgeted expenditure?
Let's say-
Is that common? Is it-
Not common, but it does provide, the department directors, as part of their job, their responsibility is managing their budget. One, knowing that they have that money, but the one that popped to my mind would be, Michael at Public Works, say Lance is our mechanic, he's working on something and just like, I don't know, whatever. Tool broke, needs that piece, goes to O'Reilly's, it's $400 at O'Reilly's, where we can wait and get it online for $100. So some of those like discretionary decisions are made at that smaller dollar amount. But otherwise, I think those would be generally, everybody's budgeted for their supplies and their services that they need for the year. But there might be something that comes up and they have a little room in their budget, and that's the thing too, a lot of the time is folks don't have that much room in their budget, or if they wanna use it, take it from another line in their budget to go there, they have to go through Candace and I, our finance director, and me to be able to do that.
Anything else on the slide?
Click rules. There we go.
Okay.
And then these are the details, just sort of how we do our back and forth. The department or agency requests a contract with our beautiful new memo, which I couldn't love more. Questions or requests, if it doesn't make any sense or you didn't say budgeted or unbudgeted, you're gonna get it back. Answer the questions you were asked on the memo. Incomplete contract requests are returned. To the executive assistant, who's Sandra, provides the county attorneys, and this is something else that's new that we've started. We have a live link through OneDrive, so we can revise the contract, without having, 12 Word documents. It's better, quite frankly. We draft the initial, sometimes we have a draft because it's a renewal of something, sometimes we have a contract that's similar. Sometimes we get it from the vendor, but we're looking at whatever we're starting with and going from there. PSAs, professional service agreements, we have a pretty well-honed, 3-4 page template now, which is awesome. And then there's a scope of work that's attached to that as Exhibit A. Hey, what's this vendor actually doing? So sometimes that's the proposal, sometimes it's 1 page with bullet points, but that becomes part of the contract. So, hey vendor, this is what you've committed to do. 3, we review and mark up the contract, as needed. And then Sandra gets back to the requesting party and says, yeah, here it is. Sandra then sends the contract back to the vendor, the contractor. And they look at it, they say, no, we don't agree with this, Sometimes it's one, yeah, we agree to everything, which is awesome. And sometimes it's a longer back and forth. When that's done, and the parties agree on a final contract, Sandra cleans it up, gets it back to the vendor for signature, notarized signature, which sometimes they understand and sometimes they don't, so it has to be sent back and forth, no, you need a notary. And then it comes to you guys for your approval and signature at a BOCC meeting. You have the draft in your packet, you get to read it, at the meeting, you're like, hey, I don't get this, or why do we need that? And then if it's all good, we get it signed and we record it next door. And the public has access to it.
One of the points about that, why it goes back to the contractor and we have them sign first, is because we wanna make sure that they have committed to the terms of the contract before the county does. Also because we've learned in the past, if we sign it, somehow it goes to recording and it ends up getting, and the vendor's never signed it. So we wanna make sure that that part of the process is completed before it comes to you guys. So once y'all approve it, it's done and you just have to finalize it.
How much input do we have during the negotiation phase of the contract?
It depends, which is of course every lawyer's favorite response to a question. One of the things is, you'll see, there's going to be a flood come March, April-ish from DHS with all the state contracts that come in every year that we are required to do. Those, most of the time, are not negotiable. So we still review them, but we review them with an eye towards identifying potential pitfalls for the staff that will be, administering those contracts, to make sure that they know what they're getting into. And some of the things like with grant agreements and such like that, as Tim touched on earlier this morning, you may have a situation where it's a reimbursement grant or something like that. We need to make sure that the funding's there for us to be able to make those payments and wait for the reimbursements from the state. So there are situations where they're not always negotiable. And so then our role becomes just, like I said, identifying potential pitfalls. And then, as Melissa said, we've come back a few times and said, this is a terrible agreement, we can't recommend that you sign it. It's just, let's find somebody else to do this for us, because they won't negotiate, they're like our way or the highway, and it's not worth the risk to the county for it, so. That doesn't happen a lot, because Melissa and I are very skilled negotiators. So we typically do contract review with an eye towards how we get the contract, not how we are obstructionist or a barricade to having it happen, so. Alright, thank you, Melissa.
Sure.
So things to think about, some opportunities and considerations. Thank you all, since the election and prior to the election your election. Sat through commissioner meetings. Sometimes might have 30 contracts for you to approve. Other times might not have a lot. So just something to consider for this. A lot of other counties have a delegation to the county manager, mainly for expediency and efficiency of county business. It's at a dollar threshold or routine contracts, like we have here for the state that, whatever, if there's a policy or procedure set up that after attorneys review, finance review, making sure it meets the board's objectives and guidance, that contracts could be put on the consent agenda, will be able to be approved by me and then ratified by the board at a later date. So we touched on some of those for the emergency situations. Those specifically come up around Department of Human Services, memorandums of understanding that there's still a type of contract but don't have the bite or any contractual damages that could happen to the county. And then like the routine and annual contracts with the state, public health, human services, a whole host of other ones with the state. So just something for the board to consider as we kick off this year and get going with you guys, but just throwing it out there.
And I'm gonna go a step further and someone begged for that. Just because, there are only two county attorneys to cover all of the legal stuff. Melissa does most of the contract work, so we already have a little bit of a bottleneck with all of the different contracts as we talked about them coming in. The other thing that slows us down is when we have to kind of wait for regular meetings and stuff like that to be done. And sometimes there are emergency situations. For example, if we've got a situation with a juvenile who needs an emergency placement, they can't wait till your next meeting, I'm sorry. And so, but technically in our procurement policy, we can't sign a contract to have an outside agency or provider take care of that child. And so I would really love to see y'all implement a delegation to the county manager for certain levels of contracts, just so that we can make sure we can continue to do business efficiently. And also because depending on when you decide you want to have your regular meetings, it is not a good time to sit through 30 contract reviews on your agenda, especially if there are routine. If they have accepted our template, made no changes, it's budgeted, it's been vetted by legal, there's no reason that y'all need to review it from my perspective. You know, if you have questions about, well, what's it for, sure. Unbudgeted stuff, fully get that because y'all are the ones that need to protect those purse strings. But otherwise, routine, annual contracts, renewals, simple amendments, extending the term of a contract or something like that, I'd really, really like y'all to consider putting that in your consent agenda to essentially delegate some level of authority to Tim for those contracts, and then we can have it on the consent agenda instead. And at any time, if something's on your consent agenda and you wanna talk about it more, you can take it out of the consent agenda. So if you see the week before the meeting or something, you see a list of all these different contracts or something like that, and you're not familiar with what they're for, you wanna talk about it more, you can always pull them out without having to pull all of them on the regular agenda.
It's also director time, right? The directors
Yes.
need to do the memo on the right time. They have to show up to your meetings, so if you all decide to have evening meetings, they have to show up just to get an annual contract approved. So it just makes us less bureaucratic and more efficient. And a lot of other counties, I did a screenshot of some of the counties, because they put a lot of those types of things on consent agenda, just for expediency, and then they can spend more time on down in the weeds, kind of really important contracts with things, big topics, so.
Did the former board not wanna do this, or is this just coming up, and why didn't they?
We talked about it with the previous board, similar to those leadership policies and practices that I'd sent you in those examples you guys saw at CCI from Douglas County. I think part of it was a control thing, which is totally fair. I understand that perspective. You know, one rationale I heard over and over from one commissioner is the educational piece to the board of why we're entering into these contracts, why we do that. And I agree with that piece, but I do think there's a way to do that. Either in regular board meetings or work sessions or talking about that. So
Cause they still get ratified.
they still get ratified
It's
and
not like they're out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
There's just an expediency to the signing
yeah,
and being in contract. It's not
Yeah.
like it goes away from our agenda.
right.
Did the board appoint one of us to be the designated signer, or would we have to wait until the next meeting?
So generally, the chair will sign contracts, that's kind of like part of the role of chair is signing some of those. So instead of, you know, at the end of the meeting, you'll see Sandra with a big stack of papers where some of them will need all 3 signatures, so please don't run away. Or other ones, you know, we will have the chair on there just for expediency, you know, you'll have the vendor and then the chair's signature on there. So you could, but you know, one commissioner, you know, I mean, I guess you could delegate it to one commissioner.
Like if the chair knows they're gonna be out of town, they're not gonna be able to make a meeting or something like that, they could delegate to the vice chair or something like that to say, you know, I'm not gonna be able to be here for this meeting, so I'm gonna delegate, you know, ask to delegate authority to sign that to someone else. So,
But I think the expectation, at least from the DHS side, would be if I need to call you in the middle of the night because we removed the child, you should answer your phone. You know, we have
Yes.
to like,
Yep,
you have to be kind of on call, which is,
That's right.
not that
How-
that happens very often,
How
but
often does that happen?
not often.
Not often, but it's happened a couple of times in the last probably 3 months-ish or 4 months-ish, something like that, so yeah.
Do you know on average how many of the other counties in the state run things this way?
Yes, the vast majority of them do.
Vast majority
Yes.
of them? Okay. So it's nothing out of the norm.
No.
I wish there was a way to, that the educational aspect is what I really, I'm wishing there was an easy answer to that. Where
Yeah.
we could implement this, but also, especially for the first, term of new commissioners, cause the more we can learn about contracts and what we're signing, what we're spending money on, the better. So
Well,
I don't know,
again-
that's something we can wrap our heads
Sorry,
around.
I was gonna say, again, they'll all be listed and you'll get this agenda in advance. So if you see something on there and you have questions about it, you can always ask staff
Okay,
questions about the contracts that are on there. Or if you get answers to questions and you're not comfortable, you can always say, I'd like to hear more about this contract, can we take it off the consent agenda and put it on the regular agenda?
right, like what Lauren was explaining earlier, that it doesn't have to be all one block.
Right.
And part of, I know Summit does it with their staff reports, and then Eagle does it, with their memos to the board too, on aligning it to, so what are the commissioner priorities? Like, why are we doing this? So it's kind of built in that way as well, so I think there's ways to do that as well, of like, it's not, we're not sneaking anything by, which I think was a past fear as well, which I can understand with previous elected officials just signing things and then causing the county liability, aka the board. But I think with a lot of the structures we've put in place, that eliminates that.
And part of it is how you personally decide you want to do business. If you're going to, the staff's gonna endeavor to get you all the information you need to be prepared for your meeting in advance.
Mhm.
If you don't wanna look at it in advance and you wanna show up the day of the meeting and be surprised or not have any background information, you want staff to explain to you what's on the agendas, that can be done. It's not the most efficient approach. It makes your meetings ungodly long.
So just playing devil's advocate here, you guys have explained all the reasons why this is a good idea. Could you come up with any reasons why it would be a bad idea?
The one I would think about is to essentially say, and this wouldn't happen in my belief with the staff that you have on board, but to say that somebody, Tim authorizes a contract that wasn't within his scope of authority. And then it would come to you, it would not be on the consent agenda, it would have to be on your regular agenda for ratification. So, but that's why you have guardrails of why every contract has to go through the submittal process and the contract administration with the memo that collects the necessary information. So we know where it's coming from.
Yeah,
And then legal vets it before he can sign it.
there's always more than one set of
Yes.
eyes going, and she's gonna catch something that might look fishy from someone in Tim's
Yes.
position.
And it's too, the guardrails that the board, wants to put in place for this policy and then for the procedure of how that works, right, that governs my work and my job, my career. So it's how it'd be as well, right, to not wanna do those things, and I do think with the staff and the team we have built that, that's eliminated, that's not there. But I think, I agree, I'm trying to think of like,
That's the one thing I would think of that would be, if he did something that was out of his, any of y'all or us that do anything that's outside the scope of our assigned duties and responsibilities, it's just that, it's out of the scope, and we're personally responsible for that. So I don't imagine that happening, but that's why you have multiple layers, and not just with Melissa and I reviewing stuff, but also, as Tim mentioned, finance wants to review too, to make sure that they've got the right procurement processes set up in their system to make sure they know what the terms are for payments and how they're gonna be paid, where the payments go. One of the things we routinely do, every contract, every proposal we get, one of the first things we do is we look at the Colorado Secretary of State to make sure that that business is actually authorized to do business in Colorado. So that we don't end up with some foreign, not foreign as in outside the country necessarily, but foreign outside of Colorado, that if the contract goes south, then it's almost impossible to enforce it, because we're all of a sudden in Delaware, fighting about this contract. So I think there are a lot of layers of review before it would come to Tim for signature or for you all to approval, for stuff.
Generally too, most of the time before things even get to the contract portal, right, department directors are vetting it with me and like, hey, I really need a contract for this. I'm like, do you? Can we do it in-house? Do we need this service? Is it necessary? Do we have the funding for it? So there's a lot of those upfront questions as well. Or, being like, that really doesn't align with the board's policies or their priorities, so I'm not gonna move forward with that.
Well, we're not even talking about those contracts, right? We're talking about like the routine ones, and I'm trying to think about this like from managerial positions I've held. Like this feels like remnants of the growing pains that we've had from moving into a county manager role where we actually do have administrative staff. And this is absolutely one of the things that the goal would be to take it off of the board so that the board is not tied up in administrative annual renewals, and that we're actually learning through other means than just through operations and like getting eyes on all AP. It makes sense to me, and I think I would be bothered. Like if my board of directors was trying to get in the weeds with my operation and I had to explain everything, and it's like, this is not what I want you to pay attention to. I want you to know that this is the trash service that works for us, I promise.
Yeah.
Like, please just help me figure out how to set this policy up.
My concern is public perception, because this is probably one of those sticking points where people are like,
We shouldn't have done that, just like the check signing authority, all that stuff. I agree with Andy, there's contention around that. And we would have to listen to that and say for.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say though, it's part of your budget process, and that's why it says, is this budgeted or unbudgeted too?
Right.
And my suggestion would be that the delegation authority should be only for budgeted things, because budgeted items are fully vetted through the budget process, fully. Your staff's gonna come and they're gonna explain, like DHS with their 20 or 30 routine state contracts every year, or explain why we need this in order to do the work we do and to get the money from the state that we rely on in order to provide those services.
so basically, I'd like to be able to take what we just discussed and, in brief, in just a few bullet points, so that we are able to answer to the community when they bring these things up, and it's something a little easier digestible, but I think it's a good idea. I think it's smart business, anytime we can increase efficiency, it's gonna save taxpayer dollars in one way or another. So public perception becomes reality for a lot of people, and that's something I'd like to improve if we can. So I don't know exactly how to abbreviate this conversation, because it's a lot, it's technical, but that would be really cool if we could figure out how to approach those conversations with the public.
We could find an example, I bet.
Yeah.
Like if we have to review our Verizon contract every year.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to move off of the board's purview. If we could find an example to kind of tell the story of what this specifically is, and it's not, and we find another example.
Yeah, good point.
So like by statute, the Department of Human Services is required to do child welfare. We get an allocation from the State Department of Human Services to do that every year. And it has to go before you all every year. Those are the types of contracts where it's just the state being like, we are mandating you to do this and here's the money to do it. And that's something we're trying to have to be able to just be like, yes, we've done this since the 60s. And we continue to get money from the state to do what we're statutorily required to do.
Does it have the same kind of limits on verbiage and how we can talk about it, since it is a decision-making process, even though we're not technically.
Oh, yeah, I think we can,
So that's kind of more what I'm talking about, like what are we allowed to say, as opposed to like I could explain it, well, I'll talk someone's ear off all day, but that's what I need to get away from, and not just how to say it, but how the right way to say it.
And part of that is you're not giving away your authority. You still hold the ultimate authority over all of this. You're just delegating sign authority. You have every opportunity to review what the contract's for, like I said, to pull it off your consent agenda. If it's on your regular agenda and you don't feel like you're informed enough to proceed with it, you can say, I'd like to carry this over so I can get more information on this as to what we're doing. You retain the ultimate authority at all times. So, whenever you delegate authority, it's only delegated as long as you leave it there. When you retract that authority, you can do it individually by contract or whatever.
Just prioritizes our bandwidth.
Yes. Exactly. And that's part of it too. And I was gonna say, if you're trying to explain to people, why are you now moving all these contracts to the consent agenda? Well, because we have a contract process now in the county where all this information is collected in advance, everything's vetted, it's been budgeted, and it's presented to us in a distilled way so we can review it. We do our due diligence amongst the reviewing what's there before the meeting. If we have any concerns, we have the opportunity to say, no, it's not. That's kind of, it's not, because if they're trying to take the tack, if you're abdicating your authority by delegating, contract signing authority to Tim, that's one way to essentially explain it. But no, we still have the ultimate authority, we reviewed this, it's just we're not individually going through all of these contracts, especially the renewal ones and stuff that have been done for decades.
On average, how much time would we have prior to signatures to look over things again?
so you should have
You
a
already
week.
said.
At least a
You
week.
should have at least a week for everything, for it to be on a decision-making meeting. And I would add to Lauren's point too, so for the state contracts for human services and even public health, if the manager had that authority to sign off on those, I would suggest that the higher and better use of the commissioner's time is going to the state and saying, this is an antiquated system, this is the way this system can improve. You have not done a cost of living adjustment for child welfare allocation since 1980s.
Jesus.
So I would suggest that would be a higher and better use of the commissioner's term in advocating for Lake County. Than like that routine and annual contract with the state. Cause then you have that piece of information that informs you from the human services director and Lauren and Chris and I of like, so here's the problems. And maybe some recommended solutions. I would think, too, I don't know where you're at with your networking on, with your commissioner colleagues across the state, but I think talking with Summit, Chafee, Eagle, picking commissioners on their experience with it, and I do think it is part of the transition to the council manager form of government. It's been a wild ride in this community. But, for the longest time, people in this community just knew the commissioners as managing commissioners. But you're not that anymore.
What's a good example, like the first one I agree with, possibly the second one, what about the third one, what's an example of a typical MOU?
And I know one of them I can tell you about, right, we have MOUs with law enforcement, for mutual aid assistance or for,
What assistance?
for mutual aid, like
Okay.
incidents and stuff like that, MOUs in between law enforcement, emergency services and that type of thing. We might not have all of the details available to us currently if a wildfire breaks out again down in Twin Lakes or something like that. And so we may need to enter into MOUs to be able to attract the resources into the community that we need in order to respond to an emergent situation.
I think those and then an MOU with, let's say, their local jurisdictions. the repaving that we did in Silver Hills this year. There was a leak, a long known leak in the water main down there from Parkville Water, right? So having that MOU with Parkville of like, hey, so we're gonna dig, and when we dig, you need to be on site to fix your stuff too. So things like that, so something that borders on an IGA, intergovernmental agreement, but isn't quite there. What other MOUs do we?
And I was gonna say, a rule of thumb typically with the difference MOUs and IGAs, typically MOUs, it's not going to be a financial obligation between the parties. It's gonna be kind of a mutual service, that you're doing to support each other. IGAs are typically when one or both parties have financial obligations to each other. So, but I think that transport, of detainees in some instances, if the sheriff's office doesn't have enough staff to have an MOU with the, there is a mutual aid, letter agreement between the city and the county for, if they arrest somebody and there's no one in detentions here available to transport them to Chaffey County for, longer holding than our holding cells will allow or something, that they do that as a part of an MOU, if you will.
When do we have to decide this? Is this gonna be on an agenda?
And this is,
No, it's completely up to you.
Yeah.
It's, I think part of it is the suggestion to perhaps think about it, if you're ready to make some sort of decision on it by, a meeting coming up on Friday, and if not that, you can have a work session on this if you want to, before the next regular meeting to flesh it out some more if you want. We can collect the information y'all have asked for in terms of, Safeway, talking points and stuff. If somebody asks, why are you giving the county manager all this authority?
Yeah, I'd like to learn as much as we can about this, it sounds good, I think let's educate ourselves as much as we can and, come up with, like, you guys said, the talking points, and it would be helpful for me.
we can work on that, we can plan out, cause we'll spend time with Candace tomorrow going over finance and the budget, but then I think later in February, we're gonna spend some more time with each of like current adopted policies, including the procurement contracting policy, maybe some recommended tweaks from staff, so I think there's an opportunity there as well to gather more feedback from the board and, but in the interim, drafting things for you guys to review and think about.
Anything else on this?
We are a team. I'm down with a little bit of humor. But so, teamwork works with communication, so if there are things that the board, seeing or not seeing, or wants differently or that, we really need to communicate on those. It is very hard, right? I'll work on setting up regular check-ins or one-on-ones with each of you, but it is hard. I'll talk with you and be like, this really annoys me, talk with you, this really annoys me, talk with you, this really annoys me. But then the board needs to talk about what really annoys you, or what's working, what's not working, what's confusing, what's missing. But it needs to be, that's the board, right, providing some of those direction or things. If you have complaints from the public, please reach out to me. I am responsive. We work on resolving issues as quickly as possible as those come up. If there's something on the agenda that you don't like, or hey, can we change the format of the agenda? Sure. If you wanna change the hallway, bring it up, let's talk about it. So I just want to invite that, we are a team. Yes, Chris and I do report to you three, but I have viewed it as being part of a team and wanting that open and honest communication so we can help achieve the objectives of the board.
Well said.
So thank you. Obviously, we're all here for it too. P loves to volunteer his time for the county for review of technical documents. But yeah, with that, thank you for today. We'll be back here tomorrow. sunshine laws and ethics, and in the afternoon, finance and budget. This evening is a conservation district meeting, it's in this room. I think that starts at 6. There's a city council meeting, is it 6 or 6:30? 6. There's also one other meeting, Mount Massive Manor, which is the low-income housing over by the elementary school, also has their board of directors meeting tonight. Can't be in 3 places at once, anyway, you guys are invited to all of those meetings, there's no expectations for attendance, but just letting you know that those meetings are happening this evening as well.
Whatever else I stuff into my brain
Yeah.
after this, something's gonna fall out the other side.
So quick question tomorrow, I know one of the things we're scheduled to start at 9 in the morning, were y'all wanting to go to community coffee in the morning? So that starts at 8:30, so
I can leave, I can leave early.
Yeah.
Like I don't mind asking to go first or.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say,
Yeah.
if we can try to be there at 8:30,
Yeah.
let Bob know that we
Yeah.
need to leave for a meeting at 9, and that way he might call from us sooner than later. But it'd be great for y'all, it's always been helpful to have the commissioners come to community coffee. I always say that that's the most productive hour I spend each week, because it's a round table, you get to hear from all different types of community leaders and nonprofits and all that kind of stuff as to what's going on in the community.
So it's
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's at CMC, yeah, and tomorrow it's actually in the classroom in the library building, so the learning center building, it's not in the Coronado Cafe classroom tomorrow. So that's the building at the top of the hill, I don't know if you know where the library, the learning center is there, so,
You know where the Frisbee golf course is?
yeah. Well, before you
It's right
get to the
across from
Frisbee,
Climate.
It's
yeah,
the one across from where you guys had the candidate forum.
Yeah.
That,
Okay.
so that building. Pinnacle?
no, it's at the new,
Discovery.
it's the Discovery, it's the learning center, so when you come up the hill to CMC and you come up to the top of the hill, it's that first building on the right there, is
Does
you
it
go
say
in front-
CIAC on it?
Yes.
yes,
Okay.
it's that building.
Yep.
And when you walk in the front door, you go to the hallway to the right, and it's at the end of the hallway on your left.
And we'll get those, we have community coffee just regularly on the weekly planner. We'll get those on your calendar just so you know they're there, you can go and we'll ask Bob. We've asked Bob for 3 years to be on his list, but that's okay.
I
Just
usually
show up
go.
and I'll go, yes,
Yes,
Chris
as I
usually
say,
goes.
I usually go each week, so, and you'll see a text from me usually, headed to community coffee, any announcements. So if you're not attending and there's something you want to report out to the community, I do that for you.
And
So we'll show up there at 8:30 and tell them we gotta leave in
Yeah.
15 minutes.
Yeah. And that's okay, Bob's usually pretty good at accommodating, you know,
I know
folks
they're
that
really-
say that.
Want us to show up.
Yeah.
He knows.
Could we start tomorrow here 15 minutes later? Is that an option, or is it too late to adjust that?
It's too late to adjust it publicly, but we can open the Zoom, and Pete, we might be a little late, if you're coming. I'll be here, so I can open it, so if people are like, where are they? I can say, we're running late, that's fine.
Let them know we're engaging with the community.
That's right, yes. And then, I will also get that on your calendars, Twin Lakes has a community coffee,
That
Fridays at
one
9.
I went to, it's very loose and very cramped.
Okay. So yeah,
It was,
at your discretion for the public meetings
Yeah.
and, yeah.
I did need to make some good faces to names there, but it was, yeah.
And so just on that line, we talked about community connections, I think I mentioned this at some point before, but keep in mind that in terms of noticing for public meetings, as Tim said, community coffee, those type of things will be on the community calendar, and it will be probably phrased in the way commissioners may attend.
Yes.
If you're not the one organizing the meeting, you're not responsible for it, it's not subject to open meeting laws, responsibilities of the three of you, because somebody else is organizing the meeting.
But we're still all three allowed to attend, we
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
make decision-making county business.
Right.
Yeah.
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 And also put it on there so that people know, well, if I go to community coffee and I see all commissioners there, it was publicly
It was
noticed I
noticed.
might be there.
Yeah.
Just so you don't have somebody who says, oh, they were meeting, in private or secret or something like that, no.
Awesome, thank you all.
Yes, thank you guys.
Oh, it is 4:06 and we are finished with our work session.
Thank you, commissioners.
I will try to